So, hello, I am Rick Steele, and I serve as chairperson of the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic media. Bruce Nystrom. Jonna Norton. Abby Callis. Carol Crane.
Present.
Thank you, Carol. Janine Kesterson. Monica Carrillo. Rodney McNeil.
Present.
Doug Wright.
Present.
I note the following staff members are also present: David Fye.
Here.
And Leslie Allen.
Here. Excuse me.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or COMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Public comment was requested by individuals who contacted the executive director of the agency prior to the meeting, who in turn spoke to the chair to determine if there would be sufficient time for public comment. To ensure adequate time for the remaining items on the agenda, the chair has allowed 5 minutes for individuals to provide public comment to speak to the committee regarding their support for requirements related to continuing education courses in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because we're conducting a public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Because the emergency declaration was issued for the COVID-19 pandemic has been extended to May 28th, 2021, the meeting is being conducted remotely to comply with health and safety concerns, as the board's conference room cannot accommodate social distancing for everyone in attendance. However, access to the meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of conference call and also at the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is being conducted remotely, the requirements of the COMA are not suspended. As such, we will be conducting the meeting pursuant to COMA and KAR 16-20-1 concerning compliance with the COMA during the existing emergency disaster declaration. On March 12th, 2021, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who have requested notice of the advisory committee meetings. The notice was also posted to the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting materials was posted to the board's website on the day of the meeting. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line, quote, request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240. Each member of the advisory committee, staff, or presenter shall state the person's name and title each time the person speaks or votes. Each participant to the meeting shall ensure microphones, phones, and other electronic devices are on mute when the participant is not speaking. Each motion will be clearly stated before the advisory committee votes, and each advisory committee member will vote when their name is called. The chairperson will announce the result of the final vote. The advisory committee lacks authority to delegate a member of the committee or staff to sign any binding document on behalf of the board, thus no such statement or motion will be made. A recording of the meeting will be posted to the board's website. The advisory committee has the following items listed on the agenda: call to order and roll call, opening remarks, agenda approval, review and approval of minutes from previous meeting, public comment, executive director's report, old business, new business, and adjournment. The advisory committee's agenda does not include an executive session. If the advisory committee elects to go into an executive session, the advisory committee will follow this process. First, the advisory committee must be in an open session before going into an executive session. Then, an advisory committee member must make a motion to recess for an executive session that is seconded by another advisory committee member. Each advisory committee member will then vote. A majority of the advisory committee must vote in favor of the motion to exercise the executive session. The chair will announce the result of the vote. The motion must contain a statement of justification for closure and is subject to be discussed pursuant to KSA 75-4319B and the time and place the open meeting will resume. If a motion for executive session passes, the conference call will be placed on hold. Attendees may stay on the call or return to the conference call number at the expiration of the executive session to attend the remainder of the meeting. The public will be excluded from the executive session portion of the meeting, as the executive session will be conducted by electronic means that is not available to the public. When the board members return to the conference call, the open meeting will resume through the conference call. The complete motion for an executive session will be recorded in the minutes.
Thank you, David. The meeting is now called to order and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on the agenda, which I believe is the agenda approval that was distributed to you all on April 7th. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move we approve the agenda.
And do I have a second?
I second we approve the agenda.
Okay, all in favor? Please signify.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. The agenda is approved. Second item is the review and approval of the minutes from the advisory committee meeting from February 9th, earlier this year. I believe those were also distributed to you on the 7th via email. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at those. Do I hear a motion to approve those minutes?
I move we approve the minutes.
Thank you, Doug. Do I have a second?
Hey, guys, I just have a quick question. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I couldn't find my mute button. Sorry about that. Since I had to step out of that meeting early, is there a portion of that that I should recuse myself from, or how should we handle that?
Oh, you mean specifically of the approval of the minutes?
Yeah, like should I step away from approving or whatnot? I'm guessing actually if I do that, then we cannot approve the minutes because we would not have a quorum, correct?
That may be true.
I think
Okay.
approving the minutes is fine. I'm sorry, I'm getting very detailed, but perhaps if we could just acknowledge that I needed to step away and was not present for the Cypac discussion. Could we do that?
So you're suggesting an amendment to the
Friendly amendment.
friendly amendment? Okay. Noting that you were unable to attend the last couple of minutes, which
Yeah, and I think it's documented in there, but it's not specific as to who stepped away early.
Mhm.
We don't normally add that, so if you guys want to do that,
Does it matter?
yeah, normally in the past it hasn't mattered, but if you want that specified, then we can go back in and specify that.
I do for that purpose because it's possible the conversation may have gone a slightly different direction had I been on the call,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Do you want just that you weren't part of that discussion or that you left at a certain time or, okay, just not part of that. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for accommodating my OCPD-ness.
With that amendment, Leslie, do you want to read what you're adding to the minutes and then we can entertain a second with that friendly amendment?
So I don't know, let me look in front, hold on. It would just, I would think it would just be a sentence saying that Monica Curlow left the meeting and was not part of the discussion B for under new business B as in boy.
Is there a second to approve the minutes with that amendment?
Seconded.
Was that Dr. Crane?
Yes, hi.
Thank you. All in favor of further discussion of the minutes? All in favor of approving the minutes as amended? Aye.
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 That motion passes. And I believe we are now ready for public comments by our guests. Is there a public comment
Hi, I'm Kritika Malhotra. I am speaking to you today as the Kansas Psychological Association's current president. And I have with me.
Hi, I'm Dr. Liz Monks. I am the KPA Diversity Chair. So speaking along with Dr. Malhotra tonight about diversity CEs for Kansas psychologists.
So what we're requesting is to have 3 required CEs specific to diversity training. And the reason we're doing that is because we feel like it's an important area and competency. And the American Psychological Association recognizes that, nationwide, when we have our graduate training programs, they are required to show that they're doing training and education specifically around diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Similarly, during our pre-doctoral training and postdoctoral training years, that's a requirement. So we feel like there's ample reason and why we need to continue that even when we're in the practice phase. I actually think it's probably more pertinent even then, because we often see people that don't always look like us. There are other aspects of diversity other than racial background that we're also going to be including in our definition of that. So, and we would, the way we're framing it, we're okay with those 3 hours or the 3 required CEs also being overlapping if needed with the ethics required hours, as well as the assessment or intervention, as long as they're specific to diversity efforts.
We took a look at what 10 other states were doing also. So there are 10 other states that require diversity CEs for their licensed psychologists, and a lot of them do the overlap with ethics. For example, Ohio requires 4 CEs of ethics / cultural competence and training. We feel like it's important, and it would be important for the BSRB to be ahead of the curve on this and join the other states that are already doing this. Ohio's had this, I know a little bit about Ohio because I was licensed there prior to being licensed in Kansas, but they've had this requirement since 2014. And we think it could come at pretty low burden on psychologists. KPA is going to be offering monthly CEs. Many of those are going to have diversity aspects intertwined. If you're an APA member, you get 5 CEs free. When I looked through the list of those CEs, there were more than a handful that had a diversity component also. So we think this requirement would come at low burden for psychologists who are doing their CE work anyways.
By any chance, did you guys look at California when you were looking at your list of states?
I'm sure we did. I'm not sure what their, actually, I looked at Arizona, Connecticut, Maryland, Mississippi, New Jersey, New Mexico, Ohio, Rhode Island, and Texas. So I did not specifically look at California.
The reason why I asked is I have a feeling California probably has the strictest list of needs when it comes to diversity training.
I would agree with that from my experience. Massachusetts is right up there with them though. But, this is being recorded, but oh my goodness, is Texas really ahead of us on this?
Yes.
Oh dear.
Yes. Arizona just recently passed theirs as well, as of like 2 months ago, or a month ago.
This cannot stand. This just simply cannot stand.
We agree, Rodney.
Okay. I mean, we'll talk about this under old business and it's only old business because someone had brought it up in the fall, and we were planning on getting to that this month anyway. But we'll absolutely be talking about that, and I may have some proposed language that we could add to the regulation. So if you two would like to stick around for a little bit, you could. We'll do some other business first, and then come back to that if that's okay.
Thank you.
Before we move on, I just want to say, sorry, this is Monica, and I know this is being recorded, but again, because I take a shower when I come home, I'm not going to show my camera. I'm not going to show myself on camera. But anyway, I did want to say I'm really glad actually that KPA has brought this to our attention. I think it's a long time coming, not just because other states are doing it, including Texas, but I I do think that this is a good role modeling for our trainees to demonstrate what we feel is the importance of their broad training, and yet another way for us, like they said, both Dr. Malotra and Dr. Monks, a good way to stay consistent with our accreditation guidelines as well, that we require the students to do. So I want to wholeheartedly endorse this. I know we're going to be talking about it again later, but I just wanted to say that now.
All right. Are there any more public comments under agenda item 4? If not, we'll move to agenda item 5, which is our executive director's report.
Great. So this is Dave Fye, the Executive Director for the BSRB, and I just wanted to update the advisory committee on two points. First, so during the pandemic, the governor has issued emergency disaster declarations, and then at a certain point, it became a great joint responsibility between the legislature and the governor to issue states of emergency. And corresponding with these disaster declarations and states of emergency, the governor has issued certain executive orders to provide guidance to different boards in regards to a number of different items. For the BSRB, the one that has really impacted the agency has been an executive order, which essentially said that occupational licenses for individuals, for those licenses that would have expired during the pandemic, it would keep those licenses from expiring. And so this was initially issued back in 2020. And then as new states of emergency have been continued or declared, the executive orders have been continued as well. And the most recent one of these was going to expire on March 31st, 2021. About 10 days before that date, we sent an email to everyone whose license would have expired during that time period that had not renewed their license, letting them know about the upcoming deadline and asking them to take action so they wouldn't be in any trouble at the end of the March 31st date. And so a few days after that, the legislature passed Senate Bill 40, which extended the emergency disaster through May 28th, 2021. But there was still some unknown factor in terms of would the licensure executive order be extended. There was some conversations that, especially for some of the other licensing boards that have a 1-year license, that with it already being a full year since the pandemic began, this was creating some confusion and some issues. For the BSRB, our licenses go for 2 years for the permanent licenses. And so there was some concerns about whether or not the governor would extend that executive order. Basically, on April 1st, the governor did decide to extend the executive order through May 28th, or when the disaster declaration or the state of emergency ended, whichever was earlier. So there was some new language with that executive order, but that new language was a little bit unclear. It kind of provided a little bit of flexibility for agencies if they could meet a fairly high burden in terms of whether or not they had to continue that executive order. And we consulted with our legal counsel. There was a lot of confusion about if that could actually be used by the BSRB or not. So we continue to look into it. I understand that there have been some ongoing conversations with the governor's office from other regulatory boards to see if some of the language in the executive order can be changed, maybe to change some of the shalls to may, to give licensing boards some flexibility that they can decide for themselves if they want to continue to keep these licenses from expiring, or if they want to go back to the sort of the normal way of being, so that the licenses would just go ahead and continue to expire on their normal dates. And I do want to clarify something too. So if you look at our current number of licensees, some of these numbers are going to be a little inflated because right now there's really not a way for individuals to make their licenses inactive. And so the list of licensees that we have that would have expired, some of these individuals could be people who would have chosen to retire and stop practicing. I was contacted by at least one person who indicated that the licensee had passed away. So there's going to be some people who are wrapped up in that number. But that's where we stand in terms of that. So when we found out about the extension to May 28th, we provided that information on the BSRB's website, put it towards the top so licensees would have a little bit of clarification on that. If there is some change in the executive order, it will go towards the board for the board's consideration. I know the individuals who have really wanted that to be more flexible have said if they can change it, they would still want to give people enough time, a certain window of time to make arrangements to go ahead and make sure that they are practicing with the current license. So wanted to give you an update on that. The other item is earlier this year, the agency requested introduction of legislation for statutory changes for the licenses in the form of a bill, and this was introduced as two different bills with identical language, House Bill 2208 and Senate Bill 238. And the two reasons for that is because we wanted to allow both the House and the Senate to be able to work on it simultaneously, or for one to go ahead and work on it first. Also, there was some concern about with the pandemic, it might have condensed the schedule of one of the two committees. So we introduced the bill in both the House Health and Human Services Committee and the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee. The bill was amended the same way in both committees and passed out favorably, and then went to the floor and passed, went to the other side's chambers and was heard. And there were some amendments not related to the content for the BSRB when it reached the other side's chambers. And then the bill essentially passed in different forms. Essentially, when that happens, the bill goes to a conference committee. So just to kind of clarify all, essentially what happened is that the two bills went into conference committee, and the bill relating to the BSRB is House Bill 2208. Senate Bill 238 essentially became a shell for other contents of bills, so you don't need to worry about Senate Bill 238. House Bill 2208, in the end of the conference committee, had about the contents of 5 other bills added to it. And then that conference committee report was provided to the legislature, and it was run on both the House floor and the Senate floor and passed both by fairly wide margins, and it has been submitted to the governor for the governor's approval. So the BSRB bill is to the governor, and we're waiting action on that. And so just wanted to go ahead and give you an update on those two issues regarding the licensure related to the pandemic, and also the bill related to statutory changes for the BSRB.
Okay, thank you. I think our old business includes an update on the Cypac bill 2209. David, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So when the advisory committee met the last time, there was a discussion on the Cypac bill, which is a multi-state compact that involves licensed psychologists that would allow for telepsychologies or telehealth services to be provided through participation in Cypac between compact member states. And House Bill 2209 was the bill that was being considered by the legislature for Cypac. The advisory committee reviewed the bill. We had legal representation from the Attorney General's office come to the advisory committee meeting. We asked those individuals and also the investigator for the agency to weigh in on some of the contents of the bill. The advisory committee had concerns. One related to ensuring that this bill would be able to provide public protection for the public. There were some questions, and ultimately the advisory committee recommended that opponent testimony be provided at an upcoming bill hearing on the House side. Opponent, for the purpose of saying that the advisory committee would recommend the bill not go forward at this time. The three main concerns for why the advisory committee would recommend that the bill not go forward at this time were some questions about how individuals would file complaints against out-of-state practitioners under Cypac, the investigative procedure, specifically how members compact states would be able to coordinate investigations between states, and then also some unknown financial impacts towards the agency as it relates to the agency's ability to carry out both the licensure responsibilities and investigations of complaints. After the advisory committee met, the board met to look at different bills before the legislature, one of them being Cypac, and the board had discussion about the different components in the bill. The board did recommend that opponent testimony be provided to the Health and Human Services budget hearing on the bill for essentially some of the same reasons that the advisory committee had spoke to, asking and recommending in the testimony that there be more time for the board to work with advocates for Cypac and also from the KPA to go over more details and to clarify more information, and recommended that the bill be considered in the next legislative session to allow more time to work through these details. So following that meeting of the board, I provided that testimony at the hearing. Since that time, I did meet several times with representatives from the KPA, and also from Cypac to get more information, to provide them with more information about our licensees, about our investigative procedures, different things like that. The House Health and Human Services Committee did make an amendment to the bill to change the implementation date from July 1st of 2021 to January 1st of 2022, and then voted the bill out favorably from committee with the amendment. The bill went to the House floor and passed by a wide margin and was assigned to the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee. Before that committee heard the bill, the board met to invite representatives from Cypac and the KPA to come and speak to the board to clarify some of the questions and concerns and to allow them to provide more information to the board on some of the issues the board has spoke to before. Representatives from Cypac and the KPA did come and answer some questions, provided some additional information. Following that meeting, the board recommended that when the Senate committee considered the bill, they recommended that neutral testimony be provided, saying that they appreciated the input and the substance that the members of Cypac and KPA provided, but there were still some concerns related to some of the issues that had been spoken to earlier regarding investigations and also the financial impact to the agency. And so, like I said, they recommended that neutral testimony be provided. At that meeting, they also recommended that I reach out to states which had already implemented Cypac to collect more information about their experiences. And so after the meeting ended, I went ahead and reached out to a number of different states. I initially tried to reach out to the 4 states surrounding Kansas, which had adopted Cypac. I was having difficulty contacting members of Colorado and Nebraska. So I widened my net and I was able to contact representatives from Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, Georgia, Arizona, and Utah. And I also had continuing ongoing conversations with Janet Orwig from Cypac. And a lot of information that I learned from that, I was able to provide to the board at a later date. But essentially, some of the information that I had asked of those different states about had to do with the questions that the advisory committee and the board had asked concerning investigations and complaints, the fiscal impact as it relates to those states. There was an assessment that is part of Cypac, which I'll get into a little bit later. And then I wanted to know if the other states had needed to implement rules and regulations for the administration of Cypac. And so what I came to find out in going through all this additional details and the ongoing conversations is that Cypac essentially started back in 15 or 16, but they needed a certain number of states to join Cypac. And so Cypac really became operational really around 2019. And then when the Cypac started receiving the request for the e-passports to provide these telehealth services, that began in July of 2020. So when I contacted states and asked them about any issues or what their experience has been like with complaints from members of the public in terms of out-of-state practitioners or coordination of investigations, what I learned was that they hadn't received any complaints against out-of-state practitioners. But they also thought it was too early to really talk too much about coordination of investigations, one, because of the lack of complaints, but also because of how recently Cypac had passed in the administration of those conditions. I did talk about the fiscal impact because one of the questions that had been discussed previously was if members want to participate in Cypac and those individuals are currently just receiving a Kansas license to do telehealth services, we might see a lower number of people continuing their license in Kansas and just doing Cypac instead. And so I asked some states if they had seen that. The problem is given the short period of time that Cypac has really been issuing these e-passports, none of the states could really talk about estimated revenue loss because they said there really hadn't been enough time to really see trends in terms of this. Some states did note that there was concern about potential losses in revenue, but I don't really have any hard information to provide to the advisory committee because they said, you know, we're looking at that, we're going to watch, but it just had been too short of a period of time. There is an assessment as part of Cypac, and so to participate in Cypac, there is a cost to the individual who is a licensed psychologist, but also Cypac provides for an assessment to be charged to the state of Kansas, and that assessment is $10 per licensed psychologist who chooses to practice in Cypac and is approved, who also list Kansas as their home state. And so there would be a limit of up to $6,000 that Cypac could charge a state per year, but essentially that would be the assessment. And I mentioned that the board had recommended neutral testimony be provided on behalf of the agency in terms of the Senate Public Health and Welfare hearing. And this question on the assessment did come up at that hearing. And it was noted that this assessment cost would have to be paid for by the BSRB. Now, in talking to other states, there are some other states that are funded a little differently. Some of them receive a direct appropriation from their state's state general fund. The Kansas BSRB, we are funded through the receipt of licenses, and then that license money really is distributed between the license program and the investigation and discipline program. So without a way to get state general fund appropriation, which the chair of the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee noted he was not in favor of the state providing additional funding for this assessment, it would just have to be a cost that would be absorbed by the agency. And so following that hearing at the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee, Whitney Dameron, who is advocating for Cypac on behalf of KPA, did reach out to me with some language that he said he would ask the board to consider as a way to address the concerns about the assessment. And that language that Whitney Dameron provided to me says the BSRB may assess a fee of not to exceed $25 at time of licensure or license renewal for any doctoral level psychologist who designates Kansas as their home state and is a participant in Cypac. And so after I received this language, I tried to coordinate a meeting of the board to consider it. There was a real tight time frame for the committee to meet to vote the bill out of committee. So I wasn't able to have the board meet to reach a position on this language prior to the bill being voted out of committee, but it was voted out of committee. The board had a meeting and the board considered this language, and the board noted its appreciation of the language being provided by KPA as a way to work together between KPA and the board. And the board did say it would be supportive of language like this to allow the state to recoup some of the cost of the assessment to the state. And so we went ahead and the bill was worked on the Senate floor and it passed in a different version than the House. So it also went to conference committee. And in conference committee, Whitney Dameron notified the chairs of the amendment. And then I notified them that, yes, there had been a board weigh in on this potential language as well. And the board is supportive of it. So in conference committee, both the House and the Senate met to discuss the language, and they went ahead and adopted this language into the conference committee report, noting that the KPA and the board are both supportive of this language. The contents of Cypac have been added to Senate Bill 170, which essentially is acting as a vehicle for Cypac at this point, along with contents related to a physical therapy licensure compact. And that was run on the House before they left for the omnibus period. The House voted overwhelmingly in support of it, 119-4. The Senate went ahead and adjourned before taking it up. So it is still available as a conference committee report for the Senate to take action on when they return for the omnibus period on May 4th. So I realize that's a lot of information, but I wanted to kind of start from the beginning and bring you up to speed on where Cypac is at. So it has been passed by one chamber with this modified language, and it is eligible for the Senate to work on it when they come back from their 3-week break.
Thank you, David. Any questions from the advisory board committee?
I just want to say thank you for that very thorough report, David. That is incredibly helpful. I appreciate your attention to detail, because that level of detail I think is helpful, particularly for this item. And I really appreciate you working with all parties to be able to come to what sounds like a fairly mutual consensus that has been workable or will be workable, hopefully. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, so the next item is item number 6B, which gets us back to the CE requirements for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Leslie, do I have permission to share my screen?
I believe I can do that.
Oh, you've already given me permission.
Yep. Go ahead and give it a shot and see if you can share your screen.
You have. Look at there. Isn't that Cool? Technology is amazing.
Way to work.
What I'm showing you right now is KAR 102-1-15, which is the regulation that requires psychologists in the state of Kansas to get 50 hours of continuing education each 2-year renewal period. This is what currently requires us to have 3 hours of ethics training and 6 hours of treatment and or diagnosis of mental disorders. I've highlighted on this copy section C, which is, I believe, the section that we might consider adding language to require diversity, equity, and inclusion language fairly easily. So I'll read for those of you, if you are listening and don't have a screen in front of you. During each 2-year renewal cycle and as part of the required continuing education hours, each licensed psychologist shall complete at least 3 continuing education hours of training on professional ethics and at least 6 continuing education hours related to diagnosis and treatment of mental disorders. These hours shall be obtained from any of the activities specified in paragraphs D1, D2, D4, and D6 of this regulation. Last fall, when I first heard about this, I had drafted potential language to add to this, but there were other things to work on, and we're finally here. I apologize for the delay. As a starting place, what I had drafted, following the words training on professional ethics, adding a comma, and then the words at least 3 continuing education hours on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues within the professional context, comma, and then it would continue at least 6 continuing education hours related to diagnosis and treatment of mental disorders.
Yes, please. I
I'm
like
sorry.
it.
It's hard to contain my excitement for this. It's so timely and almost we're behind, as you know, stated. So I support it wholeheartedly.
Does that language look acceptable to people?
Yes.
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 I think everybody's on the same page with this one, which is unusual for our group.
Yeah, I know. It's probably the end of the world.
Be afraid.
And Rick, I have a couple of comments for you when you have a chance. So I was talking with Leslie just a second ago. She indicated that there are also some statutory language which may need to be updated concerning this issue too.
Yes, the authority for having a specific continuing education is in statute. And ethics and diagnosis and treatment is already there. So we would need to amend the statute first.
Shoot. Okay.
Because we always have to put a, pop the button.
Okay.
And Rick, there is one other point too. So I asked Leslie, there was a comment made during the public comment about the advocates for this would be supportive if there was the ability to overlap the requirements between this and ethics. And I asked Leslie what the practice had been for the agency and if there was existing overlaps, if that was allowed or specified. She indicated that based on what the agency has done in the past, since the language of the regulations talks about 3 hours in this category and 3 hours in this category, essentially in the past, the practice has been for those not to overlap. But I think if that was going to be the preference of the advisory committee, either could just add some additional language to allow for that in this case. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention so you would be aware of that as a practice, because I wanted to clarify that for the advisory committee.
Yeah, so and I had also brought that up in addition to the comments earlier. I had brought it up, and the reason is my program, is a provider of APA approved continuing education, and about 2 years ago, maybe 3, we had a really great, I thought, great workshop on that would have overlapped between ethics and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so the thought occurred to me, well, if I had gone to that workshop, which I did, would I then count it in both categories? And I can see an argument both ways, right? I can see an argument for, fine, you went to the workshop on, and this one was actually, called Clinical Practice with Clients from Diverse Backgrounds, Strategies for Ethical and Effective Practice. And it was good. It was what it said. It was, does that count as diversity, or does that count as ethics? Or if I've done that one, am I good in both categories? And part of me would like to see it being okay for that to count for both. And part of me also thinks both of those topics are equally important. And if there's an additional ethics requirement, or an ethics requirement and a diversity requirement, I'm fine with providers in the state needing to have continuing education in both of those. So I'd like some comments and thoughts on that before the easy answer is to just write what I said and then fix the statute and then let us keep going like we've been going. And it sounds like then it would be 3 hours of diversity, 3 hours of ethics, and 6 hours of treatment. And that would be fine with me, unless it's not fine with you.
I don't know that I have a strong preference either way, if it overlaps or doesn't overlap. I think the spirit of it is probably what's most important, and the endorsement of that. So I could be easily persuaded either way. I guess I lean slightly towards letting it overlap, just not to create a gotcha environment, but I could be persuaded either way.
What are other states doing on this question?
Oh, there are several of them, and I can't speak to every single one, but part of the reason why Krithika and I suggested having overlap be a potential option was because there are other states that do sort of a like ethics slash culture and diversity that do allow for overlap. So that's how some states do it, but I think there are other states that separate it out. But there were, I think, more that allowed overlap.
Mm-hmm.
So in those states that allow, you said either or. So the way that would be written, it would be diversity, equity, inclusion, and or ethics. Because
I don't think it's an either or. I think it's you can use it as both categories.
Okay.
Right. So it's like a ethics combined with diversity, in what I've seen at least. And to answer your question earlier, what I was looking at and what I've talked to other people in different states is it's a mix. Some of them are doing it where it's required in addition to all the other required hours. And then some states are doing it like what we had suggested, is where you're required to have those hours, but they can also, like, you can double dip basically, right? And use it in other areas as well.
I can read I can either send this, or I don't know if I can share my screen, but I can just read the language that Ohio has for how they have it set up with the overlap. So it says a psychologist in Ohio must complete 23 hours of continuing education per biennium, including at least 4 hours in ethics/cultural competency. This 4-hour ethics/cultural competency requirement went into effect 9/1/2014. Psychologists still only need 23 CE total, but now they must include any combination of ethics/cultural competency equaling 4 CEs.
So if I understand that, I could do ethics and not cultural competence and meet that requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They have it set up as a combo, which I don't think we
that's a
would
step forward.
want to do.
Yeah, I don't think that's a step forward. That to me is a step nowhere, right? That's not a step.
And for instance, I just completed 6 hours of cultural competency and forensic assessment. So that may fulfill 6 hours of the assessment and diagnostic requirement. Would that also double dip me with the 3 hours of diversity? Like, I'm not sure if I get the math right, if with the and or language. How many required CE would we be looking for if we are being asked to audit?
I think what we have been advocating for is that at least 3 hours are diversity specific, not maximum, minimum, right? So if you did 6 hours, then you did 6 hours and you had the minimum required 3, and yay, 3 more.
Right.
Because I think part of what we struggle with without having the and or language, what I would caution is because I feel like people self-select for these, and that's actually exactly why we need them to be required. We had a recent conference, a KPA conference was a diversity specific one where the president of our American Psychological Association came and spoke, and we had 25 people participating because it's not required.
Yeah, so I guess this makes me think that really if we're looking to, as Dr. Carrillo mentioned, set an example and to really show that we're serious about this, I think I would argue for making it 3 hours of ethics, 3 hours of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and 6 hours of treatment, and just let it stand like that. Not raising the total number of CE hours from 50, because that's, I think, right where it should be. That's my opinion. But having those 3 categories that each have to be fulfilled. I feel like that's making us serious about it.
I agree, and I think it's cleaner.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yes, agree.
It avoids all the confusion of does this count or where does it count? Yeah, I agree.
And my suspicion is it's going to make it significantly easier, not that this is a reason to do it, but just a little advantage is that it will make it significantly easier to write into the regulation, and hopefully it's just an insertion of a handful of words into the statute as well. Is that true, Leslie?
Yes, I believe so. I think it would be hard for the regulations if you can double dip. It will also be hard for, and not everybody, but for staff to explain how that works and what they can do and what they can't do. It just muddies the water. So I agree with you.
And like someone said a minute ago, there are people who will be motivated to try to make other things count. And I think that defeats the purpose of the change. So, okay, so it sounds like, is there anyone who feels strongly that we need to figure out the language to make double dipping a thing? Or can we just go ahead with, okay, I got a no from Rodney, a very emphatic no. Okay. All right, Doug, are you okay with this?
Yeah, I'm good. I think this is the way to go. I like it's cleaner, it's easier. Yeah.
I like clean and easy.
I don't believe that you would need to do language for that, for no double dipping, because we do that now, right? Even though it doesn't specifically say, like if you do a 6-hour course on ethics and cultural diversity, you could count it in both places, 3 of 3, but not in separate places for the same hours.
I like it. Is advisory committee and our guests, are you okay with the language that I had up on the screen a few minutes ago for the reg?
Yes, please.
Okay. Then do we need it sounds like we have consensus. Do we want to formalize it with a motion?
Probably. I would think
a motion just to recommend this to the board.
That would be appropriate because
there's legislative pieces to this too, but
yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, David, but I think the process is if the advisory committee recommends this to the board can begin the process of changing the reg, and then we will unfortunately have to wait until we can get the statute fixed. Unfortunately, that'll be next legislative session because we're already past the point of no new stuff in the legislature.
Right. And it's also good timing because the board has its annual planning meeting in September, because other professions might be interested in changing their statutes as well, because this has come up in more than psychology meetings.
Okay.
I would move that we adopt this change as outlined by Dr. Steele, and to clarify to the board that our preference is to not allow double dipping.
I second the motion.
That was Rodney, correct?
Yes.
Rodney McNeil. Okay, Dr. McNeil.
Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please signify.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Excellent. Well, that's some nice work. We can all feel good about. Yeah, nice job, Monica. I like the little emoji there. We can all go. We can all go home and feel good about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, this will be good. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Thank you all for your work on that. And I agree, this is a long time coming, and I think it does set the right tone and example. And I do think that, like someone pointed out, the doctoral programs and the internships and the postdocs are doing this. And it just makes sense that we would have the rest of us do this as well. Yeah. And on that note, my program is doing a workshop tomorrow on treatment of kiddos who are transgendered. So if anyone wants to, you have to register pretty quick because you have to register in advance, but it's tomorrow afternoon at 1, so should be good. David, do we have enough on that to move forward? We have a board meeting on the 10th. And so I'll present that for us to the board, and then we'll figure out how to get the legislation in there as soon as we can, if that sounds good.
And then the other groups will be jealous that we did it first.
Yes, they will.
Thank you, KPA.
Okay, moving right along to 6C. There have been a number of folks over the last, I don't know, year who have contacted various board members and maybe advisory board members and agency staff and a whole bunch of people about recommended changes to the supervision regulation. I'm going to see if I can pull that one up also and share your screen just so we're looking at it while I'm talking about it. Let's see, that's
You did.
5A,
You put it in there.
is that
I was
correct?
going to look up the statute.
That would be great if you looked up the statute, Leslie. That would be, I don't know the statutes as well as I know the regs, but okay. So as you're all aware, KAR 102-1-5A is the supervision regulation that specifies the kind and quality and rules around postdoctoral supervision. It has come to be a kind of an issue this year in a Zoom environment because of a specific clause. Let's see, it's E3A. I thought I had it highlighted. Yes, there we go. So I'm highlighting it on my screen now, and you're already seeing the issue, right? In that first line, the supervisor, in addition to meeting requirements listed in subsection D, shall perform the following: provide individual supervision by meeting in person with the supervisee. When meeting in person is not practical due to an emergency, geographic distance, or other exigent circumstance, the supervisor may meet with the supervisee by interactive video or electronic or telephonic means of communication. The supervisor and supervisee may use any electronic or telephonic means of communication that protects the confidentiality of their supervision. And here's the problem. The use of these potential problem, I'm not playing my hand, just a potential problem. The use of these means of communication shall not exceed 1 out of every 4 supervisory sessions. Well, we've all been through, COVID, right? It's been a year. And there have been a number of people frustrated, confused, not certain of how to count hours of supervision that they've gotten through Zoom or other electronic means during this year. It looks like 25% could count, but in excess of that, this regulation seems to forbid. Have I characterized it, David and Leslie?
Yes.
Yep.
You want to add anything? The number of comments that you've gotten or anything there you want to share?
Yeah, well, I think, it's a lot of the language in House Bill 2208 really talked about addressing some of the in-person issues for a lot of the other professions, clarifying some of the difference between face-to-face and person-to-person, and allowing for some of the use of the televideo supervision, and then allowing for some of the use of telephonic supervision in certain circumstances. So I think one thing that should be said is this specific language relating to 1 out of every 4 supervisory sessions, that limitation is unique to the profession of licensed psychology. So I think that should be brought out. But yeah, we have received quite a few requests requesting that the advisory committees look at this and then consider changes to it. And some of them specifically were relating to the pandemic, but I think there were also some concerns. The advocates for it indicated that they would prefer that this is addressed because of the pandemic, but also that it is addressed for beyond the pandemic to allow the supervision to be carried out. Some of the arguments that were brought forward in terms of the BSRB bill, in terms of loosening some of the restrictions on supervision, had to do with some of the difficulty in getting supervision in places like Western Kansas and certain areas that may be difficult to find enough supervisors in a certain area, or if there's not a strong source of internet capability, potentially you would need to use a telephone for supervision because of the signal strength for the internet service. So I think some of these other issues were brought out during the discussion on the changes for that bill, but I think they would also add to the weight of any potential changes to this as well.
And I'll just add that your statute, the other profession statute, says how many hours of supervision and whether, how much needs to be individual and how much can be group. Your statutes are not that detailed. So most, yours just says at least 2 years of supervised experience, a significant portion which shall have been spent in rendering psychological services satisfying the board's approved standards for the psychological service concerned. So how often, how you meet, all of that is in your regulations. So you're pretty open on any changes you want to make in the regulation, if you choose to.
And unlike the diversity conversation in terms of you would need to do the statute first, I think what's unique about the regulation changes on this is you could go ahead and make a recommendation to the board for a change to the regulation. And if the board went ahead and approved that change, we could include that on some of the other regulatory changes, and it could have more immediate impact.
So are we waiting just for further discussion? I was waiting to see if Rick was going to say more. I guess I'll jump in a little bit with my comments. I feel like the limitation there is really kind of outdated for the world that we live in televideo, not only this year, but in previous years. As we're allowing the use of televideo and other means to treat clients, I don't see that supervision would be any different. My belief is we should remove the limitation for only 1 out of 4 and just let it state that can be by electronic means.
How about the
So-
language of, sorry, when meeting in person is not practical, as in, you know, the default is to meet in person. I guess we're still advocating for that, but, or are we?
I guess,
Rick?
yeah, go
Oh.
ahead. I'm
I
sorry.
was gonna say, do you want me to talk, we've talked about the other professions, and while you're not obviously obligated for that language, do you want me to give you a little bit of that language? It sort of helps put it in perspective, I think.
Sure.
Okay, so for the other professions, their regs are changing to that all supervision will be face-to-face, either in person or if confidentiality is protected by video conferencing, and that telephonic supervision may be used if extenuating circumstances are present. So like the pandemic, and then that the extenuating circumstances are approved by the board. So it's not just up to them, that part's up to the board. So just to give you a little bit of,
Sure.
something to start with.
So they're making a distinction, then you're saying, between telephone versus televideo.
Yes.
Yes.
And that was very intentional. And the example was, yeah, I could say I'm doing supervision with you, while I'm driving from here to, Nebraska. How much attention am I paying to our conversation versus how much am I paying to, my driving? And I think you want me to be paying attention to my driving. And so can I count that hour while I'm driving from here to Lincoln? Is that the same thing as this Zoom call?
Yeah. And I think there's just certainly a qualitative difference between the televideo Zoom call and just a phone call. So,
right. And that was the rationale. Yeah.
Right. I like the way that the way Leslie stated other groups are doing it.
So that would just require a change in this little paragraph to be a little more consistent with some of the others. I think it does remove that last clause. The use of these means of communication shall not exceed 1 out of every 4 supervisory sessions. And then it just requires a little bit of tweaking the language to distinguish between face-to-face, including video, versus only, or versus telephonic.
So yours says when meeting is not practical due to emergency, you want that left in or taken out?
I would say taken out. I
was thinking that too.
I like the way you worded it that others are doing. I thought that was well worded.
Okay, so we're not limiting the televideo supervision, just telephonic. Okay.
So you guys, as I think about this, sorry, this is Monica. As I think about this, I wonder why it is that it was so important that folks meet in person. To me, the only 2 reasons I can think of why people felt like it was important to meet in person would be because either they needed to ensure that confidentiality was protected, just as Rick said, like, are they paying attention, both parties, and also, are they actually connecting confidentially? But there's also the piece of part of supervision is actually reviewing people's written documentation. I think that the language that we're suggesting here would take into account that piece, but I do also think that it would be important for us to just consider and make sure that we're including all aspects of supervision and not just thinking about the talking part of supervision, if you will, or I should say the partnering of the talking with the documents review part, as well as hopefully observation, because hopefully you're observing your person in training at least once per rotation or quarter or whatever it is, however, whatever the length of whatever it is that you're doing with them, if you're meeting accreditation guidelines. So I'm thinking of it as kind of broader than just talking to the person. I don't know if that helps your thinking, but it helps me to think of supervision in that sense.
Well, following up on that, so do we want to revise the language to include some aspect of in-person so that it's not all video conferencing? I don't know if it even happened, but maybe just stipulate 10%. I don't know, like just to include what Monica is saying. Or is there such a necessity?
I think when we try to do percentages, it only confuses the matter. My preference would be to not do that. I do appreciate what Monica has said about those other aspects. But when we look at the language that's currently there, it doesn't reference any of that. And I'm wondering if other places in the reg it does or not.
I guess my question is, do we feel comfortable if it's all over Zoom? Like all supervision is done over Zoom?
For me, the answer is yes, because I've had good experience with it in this past year and prior to that, some of which was clinical supervision, some of it was administrative supervision. But I've almost found it enhances what I do. It's easier for me to, and this is in-house and we can do it through Zoom in a compliant way. It's easier for me actually to review charts and to do some training by Zoom than it is person to person. For instance, when I'm reviewing our charts, which are electronic here, it's much easier if we have this shared screen, much like we're doing right now, for me to look at and discuss notes than to try to lean over somebody's shoulder and look at a computer screen. So I've actually found that aspect of it easier by televideo and Zoom than I did previously. And much easier than back in the day when it was handwritten things that I couldn't read.
So the other piece to that, Doug, I think is the observation piece. And that you can also do via Zoom. So you can observe somebody, or actually any appropriate platform, but you could observe somebody giving therapy or doing an assessment or anything like that via electronic means as well. So, so I just wanted to clarify that as well.
So this is Rick. I'm wondering if there's a way. So Carol, I don't have an answer for your question as far as, is it okay if all of it is via Zoom or electronic means? I have mixed feelings about that. I respect Doug's opinion on that. I have made do, right, with what we've got for this year. Some things of this year will never go back. I know that, and some things shouldn't ever go back, and some things I hope do, right? So I don't know exactly where I am on that, but I do wonder if we're going to improve the language of this of this paragraph, if there's a way of, if we decide we want to use some of the other professions language, that we enhance the language around electronic means which allow for review of notes or review of documentation, comma, review or sharing of review of video or observing clinical practice. Just so some of those things that Monica, you were saying that are particularly valuable, right? Which I think we would all agree with. If we just have it encoded in here, that we recognize that as critical aspects of supervision that have to be available for people's supervision. What are your thoughts?
I agree, Rick.
And another thought is like, how about if we can go empirically? I know that there have been recent articles on showing there's no deleterious effect on conducting a Zoom facilitated therapy, say it like that. So is there such an article written on clinical supervision that we can kind of consult? If there's such a thing, then maybe 100%, like we don't even have to worry about the potential implication of if a supervisor and supervisee do decide to do over Zoom 100% of the time, we won't be concerned as a committee. What do you, can we actually come back to, or do we want to just go change the language now? Because, I suppose I can quickly just Google and see if there's any clinical supervision over COVID. And
This, the way, and I haven't read the regulation, extensively lately, so, but this looks like it would apply to pre and postdoc. So if you want it to be different for postdoc, we'll need to make sure it does that. Or if you were thinking both, that's fine. But the way the regulation's written, I think it's for both, isn't it?
I believe clause A is for both, because paragraph E1 is for pre-doc requirements. Paragraph E2 is post-doc.
Okay.
And then for three, it just says the supervisor. And so I believe that's inclusive of both.
Okay. I just wanted to point that out because that may change what you want.
If I'm I'm not an attorney, and I didn't stay in a Holiday Inn Express recently.
Right.
So,
Rick, I just want to let you know, Janine Kesterson just joined the Zoom.
Oh, great. Welcome, Janine. Janine, we're in the middle of a conversation about the supervision regulation. And if you're joining via Zoom, the screen that you see is a PDF of regulation, or KAR 102-1-5A, which stipulates in-person supervision for all but 25% of supervisees' time.
I think to answer your question, Leslie, in my mind, I actually work with trainees at all levels, students, interns, and postdocs.
Uh-huh.
And as far as the supervision piece, I would feel comfortable saying that would be the same across all levels of training. And while I am able to do supervision in person, even during the pandemic, we were seeing inpatients and whatnot. I know that my colleagues, including Doug certainly, but other colleagues as well, have done supervision successfully remotely, including observing clients via electronic protected, HIPAA protected means. So I could see that this, would easily be done fully remotely.
Okay.
That's just my take on it. I'm more concerned about being able to view than I am literally being in person.
Mm-hmm.
And view, I also say with a little bit of trepidation, just because I realize that I have colleagues that have vision issues. So, as long as there's ways for them to be able to do things electronically, I would be fine with that as well and still be a successful supervisor.
Is there any?
No, thank you.
Is there anywhere else in the regs that speaks to the observation of clinical work piece?
It's actually not required in the regs. I'm speaking of it required for accredited programs, actually.
Okay.
Or actually, I shouldn't say that for sure. I don't think it is required.
I don't think so. I was gonna bring that up. If you change it, that's gonna, I mean, obviously it shouldn't be a big deal, but that would change in person as well, not just video supervision.
Yeah, that's true, but it would also bring us closer to, in line with, as Monica's pointing out, closer in line with APA accreditation standards for doctoral programs, internships, and postdoc.
Yeah, and I don't know that we need to specify that language necessarily here in terms of observation. I was just thinking of supervision broadly speaking. So I apologize if I confuse the issue, but essentially the reason why I brought it up is because many folks are working in accredited programs where this supervision is very important. And regardless of whether, you know, literally they're required if they're an accredited program to observe the trainee once per whatever evaluation period, I think is the exact language. I don't know that we need to use that language in here, but I was just hoping to be able to help folks to think broadly about what supervision is. Because I think that helps bring into context that in fact, all aspects of supervision can be done electronically.
Well, Monica, I think it's a very helpful comment on your part, and it actually makes me a whole lot more comfortable if we could figure out a way of including the words, you know, I don't know, including in there, like you said, all aspects of supervision, because to me, that does make, that is what supervision is about, and it's different than a phone call, you know, and it's, you know, a phone call is great for an emergency, right? You know, we've all had, you know, we've all had trainees who have called us, you know, because they've had a crisis and they need to make sure everything's fine. And we do that. And we still have supervision, our next scheduled supervision session, right? That's kind of that's what we do. I'm just wondering if there is value in saying, you know, that provide individual supervision. We can skip the in-person part in a means, you know, in a secure means that assures all the things that you said.
How about, do we need to make sure that it's HIPAA compliant, like a secure equivalent to HIPAA compliant, or are we concerned about that? Or
The ones that we have now say confidentiality is technologically protected. And the reason for that is that we cannot refer to HIPAA or defer to HIPAA. Well, that's what we tell people though. When they call and ask, we tell them to look for a HIPAA compliant system, but we can't put that in our regs.
I learned that that's called unlawful delegation of authority.
Isn't it a lovely term, Rick?
I use that around the house fairly regularly now. It doesn't matter what your friend's mom said. That is unlawful delegation of authority.
Oh, that is good.
Yeah, no, see, I learned things.
So what we could do is, if you want to list, tell me the things you would want, all aspects of supervision includes, or something like that. If you will tell me what it should include: observation, document, you know, sharing documentation, which I do know happens when they use, you know, secure things, they share their documents as well. But what you would want listed in the regulation, so that when I talk to Mary about it, she can help me place it in there where you would like it.
Yeah, I would just say discussion, observation, and review of documentation.
Okay.
I would
I think
recommend
that
we
captures everything.
fall short of mandating the observation, but simply say that the means of supervision must have the ability to include all of those things that Monica listed.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's good, Doug.
I think that's fair.
It includes the means of supervision must be. Okay. And then, do you want us then to put this on the agenda for the board meeting, Rick?
Do you think I'm fine with that. That'd be great, unless the advisory committee would like to
Look at the language.
see the language first before it goes prime time.
Okay.
What do you think, folks?
I trust you.
Oh, don't do that.
I think
Fine
we kind
then.
of meeting a
I
democracy
don't
as
trust
well.
you.
I think we kind of agree. I don't know that we have to see it again.
Me
All right.
too, because I feel like we have kind of stalled on this issue. We talked about it even previously, and then I just feel like, okay, the pandemic hopefully is almost over, at least light at the end of the tunnel, and then we still have this issue. And going forward,
Okay.
we are okay with just people making their own informed decision without us holding, them hostage somehow.
Yeah, and they're gonna start applying for their full license, so the sooner it's effective, they can apply and get this taken care of.
Okay.
So I'll work on that. And
You're gonna work on some language, and you'll share some language with me, and since Monica trusts me, we'll just set it all on fire here. And
No, I don't. I took it back. You told me to.
Okay, are we good to move on? I want to be respectful of your time. I think that gets us.
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, I've got what you want. I think I've got what you want, so.
Okay. I think that gets us to item number 7, new business, and A, which is listed as retention or disposal of practitioner records in case of death of a provider. This is something that the board asked all of the advisory committees to weigh in on. I believe there was a specific case that was causing people to want us to weigh in on that. In the APA ethics code, we are instructed to make advanced preparations for what to do in case we become unable to take care of the records that we have. And in the Kansas regulations, and at least in the regulations and probably the statutes, but certainly in the regulations, we are given guidance with how long we are to hold on to client records, right? So 5 years, or if it's a minor, age of majority +2, whichever is later, I believe. So then the question becomes, if I die and I have records here, let's say in my home office, who does the state need to have a regulation, I suppose, or a statute that requires something to be done with those? Because at the moment, it's up to me, right? It's up to me being ethical and having a plan and having someone to be the custodian of those should I die. However, if I go ahead and die, it's not like any of you can come and get me and do anything for me, because I won't need my license where I'm going, regardless of where that may be. So that's what I got for you. Go ahead, Rodney. Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking it's just as a practical issue here. My records are my private property,
Mm-hmm.
and it becomes a part of my estate.
It does.
And I'm not really sure how the state comes in and usurps my personal rights to manage my personal property.
So coming from well, I can't say the boards, but from listening to the phone calls we receive, it means that people, if you die tomorrow and you evaluated some child and they need those records, they want a way to give the person information. So this is why, or where you could get this information, not that we would dictate, just that it would allow us the information to pass on to clients.
Yeah, I was just going to weigh in on that point too. Yeah, there's really two issues. One is who would essentially come in and take the records, especially in a case too, if there was no other, let's say next of kin, if you pass away, who has responsibility for those records, or if, like, let's say a box of records is found. And then the second would be, yeah, like Leslie talked about, if someone asked to obtain their records at a later point, who would be in charge of making sure that you can have access to your records. And so those are kind of the two points that board was discussing. And, we had attorney generals, assistant attorney generals weigh in on this, say that at times, the assistant attorney general's office, the section of their office and for consumer protection has at time temporarily taken over records, but not as someone who would really, handle the distribution of those records for request. We have reached out to the Board of Healing Arts to get additional clarification on if they have provided input on this item for their records as well. And then at the last board meeting, there was also some information that was provided in terms of a couple of different states and what they had put forward. But like Rick said, the advisory committees were asked to weigh in on this topic. And so, but yes, those two main issues, one of them is who would, take over the records if there was no one else to assume responsibility for them. And then the second is who would be in charge of making sure that the public had protection in the sense of, can I get access to my records in that type of situation?
So let's play this off for a split second. Let's say that I have a kill switch built into my life such that my life ends and there is a codicil in my will that says everything is to be burned.
Everything is what? I'm sorry.
Everything is to be burned.
Burned. He's burning it all up.
I'm burning it all up. This is my last act to protect my clients and their confidentiality. What's to stop me from putting that into my will?
Nothing. Really, it isn't about people. Honestly,
Oh, I know what this is
it's not about people who are doing the correct thing. That's the problem.
Yeah.
There's someone whose records are sitting in an office. The person who owns the office doesn't know what to do with them. His family says, don't touch them, then you're not responsible. It's just a mess.
Yeah. No. I understand what this is to do. And I think a lot of this would be solved if we had some type of national depository that this stuff would go into.
Yeah.
But we don't have that system. But I'm just thinking logically, how do we do this from a practical matter?
Well, and I think another issue that complicates it in my mind, that when you look at that piece of protecting the public, there's the side of, gee, this kid maybe needs this eval that I performed. But then I also know there's those cases where without some guidance or nurturing care with that information could put somebody at risk. And I'm thinking of a state agency taking my notes, showing them to a client without any explanation. And it may be a small amount of cases, but there are some pretty high risk clients that many psychologists see that wouldn't have the ability to just get that raw information. And there's other aspects of the testing that we wouldn't release, testing protocols and things like that gets complicated of where does that information go? So I think there's a lot of complicated factors with that in my mind.
And I would also wonder, given that we're all moving toward electronic medical records, the idea of records being left in office is kind of anachronistic. We have a much more larger issue here, is that when it's out in the ether, how would you even know where it was?
Well, that actually, I'm going to throw an idea out there just to see how it plays. And again, this is kind of coming back to the practicality of how could the state do something here, right?
Mm-hmm.
If part of my license renewal is to identify where my records go should I die, So part of when Leslie sends me, hey, Rick, it's time for you to renew your license. I need your CE hours. And here's this form. Rick says, dear Leslie, when I die, all of my client records will be housed at, or this psychologist is responsible for all of my records when I die. And so then you're concerned, which I think is valid, Doug, about I don't want the state just to hand a bucket of papers to that client who does not know how to necessarily use them appropriately, right? That could be harmful. But if I'm the client who had a IQ test done and a full forensic battery done 2 years ago and is going to need that in his upcoming trial in 6 months, and Rodney's dead, how does that kid know where to get those? So if there was something where the state said, yeah, I don't want to see your stuff, but you need to tell me where it's going to be if you die.
Right.
How does that play?
Exactly.
I don't have a problem with that because I think the next logical step is you would add a line that says you give up rights to it as part of getting a license. And that I would have a problem with. And I'm going to add something to what Doug said. You know, I have reports that I write, as you all know it, that are court sealed, that you cannot get access to without a court order. And that doesn't change when I die.
Right.
So there would have to be some provision for something like that as well.
And would identifying to the state who is responsible for your records, would that take that into account?
Well, it depends. I mean, I would have to identify a lot of my records now when I write reports. There is a big, bold, do not copy, this is under court jurisdiction statement right on the front of them. Not at the beginning when I was doing this, I got smarter. But I think it's easier to find out the beginning ones. But yeah, I think you would have to have some type of, and this would be up to the clinician, I think, to have some type of organizing idea here that these records here are court protected and therefore they shouldn't be released without some type of court order. But again, that's up for the person to do that.
Sorry, Rodney, if it's court ordered and it's sealed, it's not really our property. It was just like it's regardless if we are living or no longer here. I think the process will be the same. No, so right, like it wouldn't be within our jurisdiction to offer it, like because the client, patient, whoever who wants to see that report will have to ask the court.
Right, because technically they are not the client, the court is.
Right. But those records have to be somewhere, right? I mean, they exist, whether they're electronic or they're paper, that doesn't matter. They exist. And upon my death, they have to go and if I'm ethical, according to my ethics code, I have made an arrangement to deal with them, right? So I've already agreed so here's how I think about it. I have already told the state of Kansas, I agree to be an ethical psychologist, right? And if our definition of an ethical psychologist means I have made plans for what happens to my records when I die or become incapacitated, then I should have already done this. And so the next logical step is just for me to tell them how I've done that so that appropriate agents could get appropriate access to those records. And if that means going through Rodney's attorney, who has all of this, the executor of his estate, then that attorney is responsible for dealing with the courts to release or not release those records. But the state's interest stops in telling the public where they need to go to get those records.
Right. Now, here's an interesting twist on this. Let's say I retire, what's the longest I've got to keep records? 7 years? And I live for 7 years after I retire. And then effectively there are no more records because I've destroyed them because they meet the 7-year cycle.
Right.
You could have that situation occur as well.
Right. And then theoretically you wouldn't necessarily be keeping it would still apply because then the number of records that you are passing on to someone else upon your demise is zero, right? And so then when you, and then for those people who work in an institution or a hospital, this is an easy answer, right? I don't own any records. The hospital owns them. They'll be here forever.
Yep.
Yep.
Yes, prison.
Well, and in truth, for the court people as well, they're here forever as well, because the record that matters is not the one that's with me, it's the one with the court.
Okay.
The court has the original copy of everything.
Okay.
I'm with you, Rick. I don't see a problem doing the ethical thing, and like it's not even. I'm not. Rodney, do you have any opposition to making a statement about just plan? Because
Oh, no, I don't have an opposition to any of this. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, trying to think through the permutations of this. I think in a logical world, I want to make sure that my patients that survive me can go on. And if that means them having access to information, then so be it. I'm like Rick, once I'm gone,
Yeah.
and you can hold a dead person accountable, but you can hold a licensee accountable, right? Like, and that's what we do right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and that's the thing, is if I'm not dead, right? So if I just don't, if I have records here and I won't give them to a client, that client has an opportunity to bring an ethics charge against me, right? They can go right up there to BSRB and say, I have a right to those records. Rick isn't giving them to me, and they will do something. Once I'm dead, there's, that can't happen, right?
Once I'm dead or once I give up my license, I can't happen.
That's a good point.
I have a dumb question, but when I listen to you guys, I need to understand. So if you have a client that you don't want them, you wouldn't release their records to them because it would be harmful. If you pass away and someone else looks at the records, is it going to be clear to them that that shouldn't be released to that client?
Not unless those notes are somehow notated in a way that would suggest that.
Okay.
I can think of situations where I've worked with children where they have given me information about a parent who sexually abused them. That's not stuff I want to ever come into contact with the parent, because that has really bad voodoo written all over it. So unless somebody really documents that, it would look like just a bunch of notes.
Yeah. Okay.
I think actually what comes to mind for me as well is there are new things coming down the pike that include information blocking. So if at all possible, you need to keep from actually blocking clients from having access to their notes. I don't know that necessarily is going to be as much of a concern in this particular instance, but we now have to, because of I always get them mixed up. It's either the CARES Act or the Cures Act. We have to release records, and if we don't, we have to have a good explanation as to why we think that is going to put that patient at risk, and we have to release it to the patient.
Yeah.
So whereas previously the choice was, are you going to click this button to say that you're willing to release this note to the client? Now you have to click a button to say you're not willing to release that note to the client. So I don't know that it necessarily totally applies here in this discussion, but I do think that we need to be careful that if you're going to use any kind of language anywhere, that you're not necessarily encouraging information blocking.
Yeah, I think we wouldn't want that to go into a statute. My only thing was whether we would want the state to be aware of where I'm going to put my records, or who's got them after I'm gone. And then to me, the rest of it's on me being an ethical psychologist to tell Rodney, who's going to take care of my records, this is what I got. This is how I code things. and these are their expiration dates. I mean, there's a lot of pieces of this that I don't think the state needs to get really involved in. But like Rodney pointed out, there's going to, I know my files and I know which ones I can shred next year and which ones I can shred the year after that, and the ones that I can shred, that's still on me.
Mhm.
And so all this is doing is Leslie asking me when I renew my license, if you die tomorrow, who's going to get all the records so that we know where to send clients if they come asking. And I think,
Right, and I think what this is basically is a professional will, correct?
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes.
that's what I've heard from other people.
yeah, right. Well, there's the professional will, right? That's mine. And this is just me alerting you, Leslie, to who's the custodian of my records. But yes, and that's completely consistent with the APA guidelines, right? And that's in their new guidelines for record keeping. I think that's like item number 1, maybe under their guidelines, is that professional will. Maybe it's 7. Anyway, it's up there.
So currently, there's no language touching on this subject at all. I actually,
No.
I'm kind of surprised because it is under our ethics code, right? Under retention of records. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because in the unprofessional conduct regulation, they state that, you have to keep, or you might have a record retention reg. It says how long you have to keep them. Well, obviously, when you pass away, the board doesn't have any teeth. We can't do anything. But there have been several people who have passed away, and I mean, not that it matters, but the spouse is really upset because now she has all these records she doesn't know what to do with. And, and really, should she be going through them anyway? And yeah, it's just, there are certain situations when it comes up, it's pretty intense usually. And it's, and it's important to them, obviously, to find their records. And all we want to know is where to send them.
So if I can do one more share screen and then I'll quit doing that. So here's the reg relating to retention of records. 102-1-20. Down at the bottom gives us our length of time that we hang on to things. So if the advisory committee liked the idea of, I don't know if this would go into the license renewal reg or statute, or if this would go under the record keeping, but something that says at each renewal period, licensed psychologist will provide the BSRB with the name and contact information of the designee who would take the records upon his or her demise or incapacitation.
But what would I say? KU hospital?
Yeah, exactly. Can we add a language to say, with the exception of psychologists who has worked exclusively within an organization?
Do you need the exception? Because Monica, wouldn't you just say you would contact medical information systems?
Oh, right. Yeah, that's true.
Wouldn't it be that simple? I mean, I know what I would say. I would say you would call the KU Child and Family Services Clinic at 785-864-4416. I'm done.
And I think it kind of in C there, it kind of speaks to that. If the licensee is the owner or custodian of the client or patient record,
Right.
If you work for KU, they're the custodian. But it would be, as Rick is saying, very easy simply to say, here's who is in charge of these records.
Yep.
Rick, let me ask you a question. Let's say I am supervising someone, and who owns the records? Does the clinician who provides the service, or do I?
The licensee who supervises owns them.
Okay.
Yeah. If you have a student, you're talking like a student?
I've got a postdoc.
Yeah. Well, you co-sign on her notes.
Yeah.
Right. So you're the one who the state would say they're yours.
Okay. Got it. All right.
Leslie or David, would this be a regulation change or a statute change?
A regulation, I believe.
Even if it means changing what information gets put in at my license renewal?
We might have to do a little bit deeper of a dive into the statutes to make sure there's not anything on this topic. But if this is the only thing that really speaks to that, it would just be a regulatory change. But we'll look into the statutes to see if there's something else that would involve something that need to be passed in a bill.
Because like most of the records information is not in the statute. So I don't think, unless it was added to the renewal statute, but I don't know that that would be necessary.
Because it seems like that's a pretty straightforward way of addressing the problem that addresses the specific need. It also, we've been talking about my death instead of, but if I were to have a stroke, I could be potentially incapacitated and unable to, so.
Right.
So that, and I can imagine that being really challenging if a consumer came to BSRB in a situation like that, and you would, sounds like at the moment you would have very little to offer.
Right. Yeah, nothing really.
Sorry, that's terrible.
So.
Okay, David, what have we done our assignment from what BSRB told us to do?
Yeah, I mean, the board just asked for the advisory committees to discuss this topic and then to bring back any recommendations or thoughts to the next board meeting.
Okay.
And what the advisory committee would, want to weigh in on in terms of this discussion or any recommendations for changes to maybe attempt to resolve this issue. So.
Okay. And my memory of this is fuzzy. Was the goal to have one solution for all the professions or different solutions for different professions?
I mean, I think in general, the discussion has been, if it can be uniform across the professions, that is the hope for most of the changes. If it needs to be different for some reason, then it could just be something specific to licensed psychology in this case. But if it could be something that would apply to all the professions, I think that would be preferred based on the discussions that I've heard.
Okay. All right. Any other comments on this item? Because if not, I'll bring our discussion. Sounds like we don't need to come up with a recommendation for the board. They just wanted us to discuss and have ideas, and these are a lot of good ones. Okay. All right. Under number 7B, just housekeeping, just double checking. I don't keep track of how long any of us have been on here and when 2-year terms expire and when 4-year. Everyone want to do a roll call on where they are with regard to 2-year cycles and 4.
You mean 4-year cycles?
2-year terms, I believe, and a maximum of 4 terms.
Yeah, and I can clarify that. So for the board, you can serve a maximum of 2 4-year terms. And for the advisory committees, you can serve a maximum of 4 2-year terms. So the length of time is the same, it'd be 8 years, but the advisory committee, the terms that are outlined just a little bit differently, and that it's really 4 2-year terms.
Okay, so let me give a little bit of context here, because I think I've probably been on the LP advisory committee the longest of anyone. When I came on, Terry Price was one of the members of the committee, and she strongly recommended me because she wanted to make sure that there was a rehab psychologist as a part of the LP advisory committee. Mm-hmm. Other people were also recommended by the committee at that point by committee members who had been on far longer than 8 years. So I just want to let you know that.
Yeah.
They wanted to make sure that there was a good combination of people from different settings to make up the board composition. And I think since I've been on, we've really been able to do a good job of getting that variety of work settings for people who have been serving on the advisory committee. So I started in 2013, and I think, but I can't remember whether it was toward the beginning or the end of the year. And I have been thinking about the fact that, number one, that my time is probably up for service on the LP advisory committee, but I also think it's really important, and I would like to make a strong recommendation that we at least have a health psychologist. There's not very many rehab psychologists, so I have to give up on that idea, but at least a health psychologist. And I have somebody in mind actually to recommend, who I've talked to them about this and they would be interested in serving. So if this group is okay with it, I would be happy to ask her to provide you with a letter of interest and a copy of her CV for you all to consider as somebody who would take my place. She does work at KU Med. She is a health psychologist, and she is at the tail end of the early career part of her career. Her name is Jessica Hamilton, and as far as I know, she's in good standing. She's one of my faculty mentees. And I want to say I have thoroughly enjoyed serving, but I know my time is up.
Oh, you got 2 more years.
No, I don't.
You don't?
No, because if I started in 2013, that would be 8. This year would be 8.
Oh, I was thinking 10. Sorry.
You want to torture me. I mean, you just want me around some more. Just kidding.
I do. You're my go for certain questions.
Well, hey, I can still help you. I'm very happy to help you, but I have taken over as director of the Division of Psychology and Psychiatry at KU, so my job duties have
Oh, wow.
kind of skyrocketed.
Well, congratulations.
Thanks. So anyway, I actually had intended to talk to you guys about that before I even saw the agenda. So good timing on the agenda.
Let me ask a practical issue. I have no idea. Monica drugged me in here and told me I was going to get ice cream. And I don't remember when that was.
It was cupcake, not ice cream.
I was going to say, hey, I brought cupcakes. You may not have come, but I brought them.
But I have absolutely no idea where I am in that cycle.
I can look. I was going to bring a list, and we used to have it in a certain format, and one of the previous staff members changed that. So I kind of have to do more homework to get the information. So I will make that available to you at the next meeting, or I can email you each individually, but
either way.
Okay.
I appreciate Rodney being brave enough to say that, because I was thinking the same thing. I have no idea here. Monica's saying I started in 2013, and I'm like, I barely remember last week. So I'm glad that somebody else doesn't know.
Did she drug you too?
She may have been part of it. I don't know.
And so as far as Rick, there are different ways you can take nominees for, to be part of the committee. And if you want to have committee members, give people they think would be good, and have Jessica send something to Dave, that would be okay. You can also send out an email asking if other people want to be on the committee, or both. So that's kind of up to you how you want to handle that.
Okay. Why don't we figure out, Leslie, you do your homework on that and figure out. So we've got currently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we're by regulation supposed to have, is it 8 to 10?
You can have, there, you don't count you and the public member,
Right,
and you can have up to 10 committee members.
right. So we have, right. So we don't count me. Bruce is on the board. John is on the board. So we got advisory committee members of Abby, Carol, Janine, Monica, Rodney, and Doug. So that's 6, right?
Right.
Okay.
How many do we need for quorum?
5.
5. Okay.
And right. So yeah, good point, Rodney. So what we may want to think about is figure out how many years of service we have left amongst us, and then figure out then whether we need to make a larger call. And if so, then we can identify then what, all the different ways that we can make sure that we're representing the profession, right? So in addition to making sure we have a rehab or at least a health psychologist, see if there's other ways we need to make sure we're fully representing the community. So maybe you and I can touch base.
How about the diversity issue too? Like,
Yeah.
because everybody, like, I am a strong advocate of having adequate representation. So
Right.
yeah. So maybe it's an issue that maybe at least a statement that we want to welcome, a
Yeah.
diverse committee. Yeah.
Right.
I totally agree with you, Carol.
Yep. Okay. I think we're to the end of our agenda. Are there any, actually, no, we need to see if anyone wants to make a motion to adjourn. Actually, no, we have to talk about, it's not on the agenda, but we do need to talk about the next meeting. So this is April. So it ought to be what, June when we meet next?
Yes.
Yes.
June seems like an awful long time away. And then not really at the same time.
I'm sorry. Rick.
2021 seemed like a long time away.
Right.
I don't know if this is the right forum to bring this up, but what happened to the executive session when we kind of moved away from the main meeting? We were discussing an issue. Did that ever get resolved? It's not on the agenda, but I don't know if this is the right forum to mention.
So there was an executive session in the last meeting. And so that's really, so the information in the executive session is confidential.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, but do we have another opportunity to discuss? Because I don't think it was resolved necessarily. We don't have a plan in place. Or do we?
And this could be something if there wanted to be another executive session in the future. But I don't know that there was anything that was left over at the last board meeting concerning that.
Okay.
But I just kind of wanted to clarify.
This is not something that I can just email Rick about, because that will be a separate meeting, right? So I feel like I need to maybe mention it here just to make sure that nothing is outstanding.
Well, and I just wanted to clarify too. So it's okay for there be communication between members of the advisory committee and the chair. Where it becomes an issue is where it's the majority of the members communicating about advisory committee issues outside of a public meeting. So
Or Rick and each member.
Right. You can't have like serial communication where you have a chain where, one person talks to another and then like that. So it's okay for each of you to, have a conversation about something with one or two members. But when it starts to get close to that 5 number, the majority, then that would be an issue. So just wanted to clarify that point too, and any concern open meetings. So.
All right. As long as there's nothing that we should address, then I'm okay. Thank you for indulging me.
Okay, so it looks like the second Tuesday in June is the 8th. Does that look like an agreeable time for us to meet again?
I can do that.
I think so.
Yes.
Yes.
Does that work on your end, David and Leslie?
Yes, I'm checking the calendar now, and that looks like it's available. So I don't think there'll be a conflict.
Great. Then let's lock that in.
And if you want ice cream, get your own.
Yeah. Hey, Monica, you may be able to come see us in June.
Woohoo!
Say goodbye.
Woohoo.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if there is no other business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved by Monica.
Seconded by Rodney.
All right. I always feel funny about calling for a vote on that because at some level you could just click and,
Aye.
you leave, but vote.
Just kidding.
All righty. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Bye.
Motion passed. Thank you all. It was
Thank you.
have a good week.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Nice job, Rick.
Thanks.
Bye.
You too.